So I've got to record it. Yeah, so I don't use QuickTime like these other plebeians. Instead, I use OBS for no reason at all. So, okay, so we're going over Ruby boating school, and we're doing this to prep for the code challenge, which has been canceled, right? Or tomorrow. It's tomorrow at 9:30. I like to do that. I'm a sadist. I like one person at least to cry. Okay, so conceptually, the code challenges are not a big deal, right? There's nothing on them that you haven't seen before and that you haven't been working with for days and days and days. The thing about them is we go out of the way to make them as stressful as possible, right? Because everybody crashes and burns when under stress, so we try to simulate that experience by making them timed and by taking away the tests that tell you if you're doing something right. So really, as much as you guys want to focus on reviewing the content, and the content is really important, the biggest challenge of the code review is the format. Of the code challenge is really the format, at least in my experience. People walk in and suddenly forget how to do what they've done a million times because now there's a ticking clock, right? And now there's no tests, so how do you know if you're done? You just keep typing frantically. So I want to kind of focus the review today on workflow and on kind of what should be going on in your head. So I'll talk through some steps that'll happen instantaneously in your mind, right? And just give some advice on how to manage your time and how to make sure that what you're doing is correct. And then I'll tell you not to stress out because you guys are all prepared for the code challenge, but then you guys will stress out anyway, so why bother? Okay, so code challenge, all about objects, no SQL, none of that nonsense. So the first thing that you're going to want to do right away is just read the README start to finish. Don't fall into that rookie mistake bubbling in your Scantron before you read the questions, right? Just get a sense of what the app is as a whole before you delve into any specific feature, right? This just gives you a context. When you then go back and reread and look at what one particular method is going to do, now you have a context, okay? So I've gone ahead, I've opened up Atom, and I've got the README here on the side. I'm just going to glance it over and say that we've got some nonsense SpongeBob theming. We've got we've got a student class. Okay, we've got a boating test class, and we've got an instructor class. So you might not have to draw this out, right? Because at this point you've done this kind of thing over and over again. But you need to either draw it out by hand or map it out in your mind, right? So whether or not you're going to draw this out by hand, it's still something you want to pause and talk to yourself about. So you've got these three classes with student, instructor, and the voting test. What relationship do they have? Oh, dead silence. What relationship do these three classes have? Kind of, how do they interact?
A student can have many instructors through the voting test.
Okay, so let's phrase that this way. A student has many voting tests, right? And if we kind of phrase it in a simple way first, I'll show you what I'm getting at here in a second. So, and then what's the relationship with the instructors? Good, exactly. So in your mind, you jump straight to the end. Just for the sake of me processing this a little slower, right? I draw it out and just do the direct relationship so that then it's obvious that this is a join in between the two. Okay? So now I know that in the back of my head. I'm not just going to jump in and start coding right away. Now that I see this, I'm not just going to put down these relationships in code. I'm now going to know that and then start reading what the actual methods are. A classic mistake on tests and also in like production code is to write methods because you assume there's a need for them. So there's like a ton of code, probably billions of lines of code on the internet that are never executed just because somebody assumed they were going to be executed and wrote these functions that, of course, you need a function that does that, and then it never actually gets called. So we want this in our mind, but it's in its philosophical form. It's not code yet. It's just something to give context to everything else we're going to read. Good. Where should we start? Initializing. But I wanted to know what class we should start with. Gosh.
Maybe we should
Start with student because it's open. All of them are right. Okay, good. So there's a lot of different styles, and there's pros and cons to each style, right? So the kind of approach that I do too is I go like feature by feature and work on all classes at the same time. Other people go file by file. It straight up doesn't matter. And that's the kind of thing that as you develop more and more, you're going to get more of an instinct for how do you work fastest, right? What matters is that you're working in a productive way that keeps you moving. So you don't want to code in the order that someone else would code in. You want to code in an order that's natural to you. And if you don't know what that order is yet, just try different orders, right? So typically, I'll go feature by feature if I can. Since here it's a little hard to do that, to do all the code at once, just because like this isn't a full app. It's mostly just a couple of objects with certain behavior. But I'll still kind of have that in the back of my mind. Good, that was rambly, but let's just dive in. So the first feature I see is that we need to be able to have this collection of all students, right? I like starting with these class methods first, just because classes exist before objects do, in their true Platonic forms. And this is a nice simple feature that you've done 10 bazillion times by now in the labs, right? Implementing all is probably just muscle memory by now, right? How do you guys do it? If you were going to scream the code letter by letter, how would you do it? Okay, and then you would set that equal to a string, right? Okay, how would you guys do it? An empty array. Okay. Okay, and then from here you have access to this globally, or do I need some other boilerplate? Oh, like a def self all. Okay, cool.
I should put out the all.
Like one of those. Okay. Cool. Yeah, remember that you guys are allowed to take over whenever you want. Good. So so this is a good feature. We've done it 10 bazillion times. How are we going to turn this into something that we can test, right? So I've implemented a feature, and now my mind is immediately going to how can I manually test this, right? I don't have tests by hand. I know that this console file is provided for me, so I'm going to be able to launch into a file and like type some stuff out. But I need there to be something that I can type out, right? So not just that there is an empty array, but I want something to go inside the empty array, and then we'll do our first manual test. So how does that work?
Initialize it.
Def initialize. And then what do you use? Do self.all, shuffle, self?
No.
Oh, tricky. What's going on here?
That's right. You can do
Add all?
or you can do self-class.
Or you can do self.class. Oh, and there's another way, right? Because I could also do student.all. And they all do exactly the same thing. Okay. Do you guys have a favorite? Add all. Okay, so we'll do this add all. Awesome. And now, step 2. So now we've implemented this feature. We want to go ahead and immediately launch our Ruby console, which you do with Ruby and then the path to the console file. I'll go ahead and test that student is in fact a type. Student is in fact a class. I'm just kind of twiddling around with it, and I can call student.all. That's good. I can call student.new. I can call student.all again, this time with a capital T, and I get the right answer. Good. So I've implemented a feature. I've immediately tested that feature manually, right? And now I'm ready to move on to the next thing, right? So I'm not in the dark. I'm not implementing more than one thing at a time. Even though this is something that I've done in the labs 10 million times, I'm still taking those few seconds to type them into console, just because that's the fastest way to catch typos. You could pretty easily do something like that, right? Or something like this. This is probably easier. And that's still going to load, right? It's still going to load. It's going to have this add all. It's going to have this, and then it's just going to return nil every time I try to do student.all. And if my eyes don't catch that, the Ruby console will, right? So you save time in the long run if you manually test frequently and often. Good. But this initialize is all wrong because I'm supposed to have a first name in here, right? How do I add this first name? First name. Okay. What am I doing next?
You're setting the
Nice. And then we're probably going to want to read this first name, right? And me personally, different people have different styles. Some people will default to an adder accessor. I'll default to an adder reader and then only add a setter if I know I'm going to need one. That's partly because the languages that I learned with are big on keeping things, what we say, immutable, keeping things as hard to change as they possibly can be, just for stability. It's mostly a style thing, but that's how I do it. So if I go ahead and do that, then exit, reload, and do a student new, it's going to give me an error, right? Because now I have to give a first name, Patrick. Boom. And I'm going to go ahead and retest all. That works. What? Oh, snap, you guys haven't seen that? Yeah, Ruby, in all of its crazy eccentricity, has two ways to call methods. You can do just new and then list off the methods with this white space in between, or you can do parentheses, like you do in every other programming language. What you can't do is space and then parentheses. Oh, never mind, you can. Look at that. Okay.
That does break one. I had that problem today.
Okay, I don't know why that works here, but it's broken for me plenty of times.
I like to leave white space.
You know, it depends on what kind of charmed person is doing the typing at any moment.
But you do need the parentheses when you're defining it, right?
Yes, you do need the parentheses when you're defining it. Yeah.
Also, in that case, you only have one argument, but if you had multiple, would it be commas?
Yes, right. So you would just do new name other arg, right? And that's how you would do that.
You would put a comma there or not?
Oh, you would. That's why it's giving me. There you go. This is what I want. Okay. Undefined local variable. Now we've got the right error. Good. Awesome. So we got this student class. It can be initialized correctly. It can be put into this add all thing. And now we could start diving into the other functions on the student class, but as my eyes glance over them, I'm noticing that they depend on other objects. So I would just abandon that train of thought altogether and go straight to looking at these other objects that we can implement. What should we do next? Tests or instructors?
What do you think?
Dealer's choice. The dealer called on you guys.
Instructors, because the test needs an instructor.
Because the test needs an instructor. Looking back to our diagram, we can see that these are the two domain models, and boating test is just there because it has to be, you know. So I like that. Good. So instructor, if we go down to the README, we can see that instructors have a name. They've got this at all thing and then a bunch of other stuff, right? So the boilerplate code is still going to be basically the same, right? We still do at all. We still initialize it to an empty array. We do our self.all, and then, gosh, I do not like Atom. Oh, you got to do a def, and then what do you do? At all, and then, and it's good. Huh?
What do you use for the
I use Vim or Emacs because I'm super lead hacker. These are two things. They run in the console. So I don't have to have a GUI at all, right? You try to type, it's crazy, man. It's awesome. It's awesome, man. It's.
What am I looking at?
I know. Like, how could you even make sense of this, man? But that's what you use if you wanna be super cool. Oh my gosh.
Matrix.
If you quit exclamation mark.
Yeah, because I made a change. I do know how to quit Vim.
Okay.
I promise.
I'm not sure.
There we go. I quit. I actually I've been using Vim for years. I just switched over to Emacs for the first time. I don't know if you guys know about that rivalry. I was sold immediately. Within like a day, I was like, why did I ever use Vim? Yeah. It
You
was,
check them on Twitter, say, hey, you know, it's so
yeah, I should have tweeted out at the Unix Vim hackers. Okay, I'm glad I got the opportunity to plug that on the YouTube channel so everyone can see. Okay. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do an initialize here too. Boom, it's going to take in a name, not a first name, right? Instructors only have one name. And we'll do one of those. And we'll do one of those. Awesome, so what's the next step?
Check it.
Ha, good, didn't fall for my trap. We check it. We go ahead and we go in here and we do an instructor.all. Phew, gosh, that's not working at all. Did you mean Boom, good. And then we'll do an instructor.new. Good, that's failing just like we wanted to. Notice that in my workflow, by the way, I want to say this out loud, I check to make sure that it fails when I want it to fail, right? So I want it to take an argument, but I also want to make sure that it has to take an argument just to make sure that I didn't like accidentally make it defaults, right? We want to make sure not just that instructors can have a name, but instructors have to have a name. So that's why I'm doing that, by the way. I'm checking the points of failure where I want it to fail. What's the Mrs. Puff, right? Okay, and then we'll go ahead and do a .all, and it is there, rock and roll. So already I'm starting to see a problem in my workflow, right? Every time I load up this console, I'm gonna have to keep remaking these variables. Is there something I could do right now to make these tests faster in the future? Right. Write it in my console, right? This is something that I think is good to get in the habit of right away. I've seen students kind of later on, they get this code given to them that they don't want to change. They feel like this code was downloaded immediately, so it must be perfect and flawless. But remember, once you fork the repo, you have complete and total authority of that repo. You can change anything you want. You can delete all of the files. You can just abandon Ruby altogether. Whatever you want to do, you can even change these files that are built in, and it's good to be comfortable doing that. So don't assume that you're not allowed to edit a file. I've seen people feel like they can't. So we'll go ahead and we'll make a Patrick. And Patrick is a student. .new, and his name is Patrick. Then we'll have a Puff, and she is a student. No, she's an instructor. I don't know why all the readmes and examples and the solutions and everything, they always use Patrick as an example. It's like they've never seen the show. And they don't understand that SpongeBob's the main character. Like they're just reading the Wikipedia page, trying to connect with you guys. Good. So we go ahead and do that. That's all looking good. And is there anything else we can implement before we implement the boating tests?
Can you run the console again?
Yeah.
To see how the test work.
Good. So now, if I run the console, see, it's looking pretty much the same, but now Patrick is already an instance. Puff is already an instance. Instructor.all already has that in there. Student.all is already in there, right? If you find yourself working really fast, you can even do something like if instructor.all.length equals 1 puts okay, else if, no, not else if, just else puts fail. Right, you could do something like that if you want, and that way you don't even have to run the code. You can just say, it says okay right there, right? Depends on what's faster. You're kind of balancing for something this simple, right? Is this kind of a test really saving you time, or is it not? It's, entirely up to you. You're the architect of your own destiny. Good. Okay, what are we doing? Boom, boom, boom. Okay. So, can we do anything before we implement boating test? No. Let's go on to boating test. Okay. We'll go on to boating test. Oh gosh, you're on the wrong side again. Yet again, Adam, terrible. Okay. Wait, we'll go through the process. Okay, so it should be initialized with a student, a test name, voting instructor. Okay, good. So we need this all thing again. We need it to be implemented to an empty array. We'll do this def all. Oh, whoa. Something go wrong? Did something go wrong?
Yeah, sir, you created this platinum meter.
Okay, good. I promise I do know how to code. The lead hacker. Yeah, there's a rumor going around that I don't know how to code, which is 100% true. Okay. Whew, so let's. Okay, so this constructor is a little more complex, right? Because what do we need to take in? Right, a whole bunch of stuff. Now, whenever you have a long list of parameters, right, there's a good question of like, how should you do it, right? Because you guys have already gone over the named parameter thing, right? Or
Metaprogramming. Yeah.
the metaprogramming thing? Well, I mean the thing where you're like students.
Yes.
Yeah, you guys have already done that? Good. And
Hey, and,
So it doesn't matter.
we just for
Uh-huh.
laughs, could we, could you go over again? Just make
oh yeah, okay. So if I wanted to, like a lame-o, I could do these traditional names, right? But what am I typing? Okay, status and instructor, right? And that's all well and good. I can do that. The problem is, because Ruby is what we call a dynamically typed language, right? There's no types associated with anything, right? There's nothing that says this has to be a student object. There's nothing that says this has to be a string, which means when I give this code to someone else and they want to call it, they have to remember the exact order, right? Because Ruby, if somebody goes boating, .test, boating, test, .new, and they go test1, student, right? Passed, right? So this is going to run. It's going to compile. It's going to be fine, right? Even with the spelling mistake. It's going to go, which is a problem, right? Because you want your code, if it's going to fail as early as possible, right? You want to either prevent failures or make them happen immediately. So one of the features of the fact that student is just a variable and it's not a student object is that we have to have that memorized, right? We have to put everything in the right order and we might forget. So enter named parameters, right? If we go ahead and do one of these, I haven't done this in a while. I'm going to just be bold and assume I have the syntax correct.
Correct, yeah.
I do? Okay, good. I think in an old version of Ruby, you had to specify a default value, but in new versions of Ruby, you don't. That's what we're saying. We're going to assume that's true now. Maybe it's a lie. But if I do that, what it lets me do now is I don't have to remember the order, right? I can say test.new, and then I can just say name test, student, Patrick, right? And I can just give these names, and the order doesn't matter. Also, the awesome thing, which we probably haven't told you yet, is I could just, I could do this in one of them hashes, right? I could be like hash equals student object, blah, 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 blah. And then I can just pass a hash. Boom. Yeah, so you can do some really fancy, interesting stuff with that. And Rails, spoilers, is going to make...
Other symbols that are not called out and be initialized, is going to...
They're going to be ignored. I know. It's going to be awesome. There's some really cool features in Rails of stuff that'll happen automatically, and that's the underlying mechanism of how it's working, is that very idea. Okay. Yeah, in Rails, which is, it's just a bunch of pre-written Ruby code. It's nothing fancy. Okay. So, should we go ahead and just assign all these to some variables? Whew, I'm really glad nobody's offered to take over driving.
What do you mean, like actually type?
Yeah, come on up and just...
Whatever you want me to.
Oh my gosh, are you brave enough? Can you come up?
Do you type fast?
I type fast. You want to come up?
No.
Oh.
When you do it with the colons,
Uh-huh.
colon data, when you are initializing, do you need to do do you need to have the student colon and then the student's name?
Yeah, so it's a hash that doesn't look like a hash, right? So this is a key, and originally you would then specify a default value, right? So this looks more like a hash, right? Where it's the key, colon, and then a value.
Is there a way to specify what type of data it should be?
No, not in Ruby. What you would have to do is then test the data type. So you would do something like if name.class does not equal string, then do you guys remember how to throw an error?
Raise.
Right, arguments error, and you'd have to do it that way. Okay.
Do you want us to do this for the Go Challenge?
You know these named parameters?
No, the raising an error.
Oh no, you don't have to do that. It's good to like be able to do because it's super duper fancy, but it's not what we're looking for on the Code Challenge. That's kind of beyond the scope. If you do, we'll notice and we'll be very impressed. It'll be really cool, but don't let that kind of thing affect what's going on. And actually, something you guys should know about the format is Paul is gonna be one of those lunatic teachers who asks you to stay until the whole time is finished, right? So that everybody can submit at the same time, because it's actually the same GitHub repo. So once you submit, it's published to everybody. So what the consequence is we're going to tell you, like, this is where you should get, but then you still are here. So once you get to that point, you commit, and then you go back and refactor. So what I would do is I would go through it, get everything down, everything's implemented, commit, push, and then I would go back and add in fancy things like that just for fun. Because if you break it, you've already committed, right? It doesn't matter. There's nothing you can do. It's just your time to be as interesting as you want to be.
So with the Git repo, are we all submitting pull requests? Is that how we're submitting it?
You're submitting links to it, but it's actually, it's all, because everything done through Learn is like backed by some Git repo somewhere.
Yeah.
So you'll see it there.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Good. Awesome. So I've implemented this, and now I'm ready to move on. No, you gotta test it. Okay. Good.
I already know what you just said.
Guys, you gotta keep up, man. Interactive stuff. Okay, what am I testing? Okay. I'm testing a boating test, and I want to make sure that I can't do it with no parameters. Missing keywords. So notice that it's not just missing number of arguments; it's missing specific arguments. That's pretty interesting. New student, student Patrick, name test. Love that name. Failed. Yeah?
How do you make these ones optional?
You just provide a default value the same way. If you were to put a...
When you make a new voting test,
Yeah.
shouldn't the status be pending? Right? Because it hasn't failed or passed.
Very good thinking. I like the thinking about it realistically. That is a good thing. The other option would be to make it like nil or something like that, but that would be a terrible option. Her option of making it pending, much better. Boom! Look at that, all tested, 100%.
So
Perfect.
in the code, could you just set status to pending and then not input a status and it would be pending?
Oh my gosh, what if we combined all of these questions and made it a default value? What happens there? Let's reload. Boom, boom, boom. And let's, so that works. Okay. That works. I can set it to fail. Or I can leave it out altogether and it's still pending. Super fancy right there. Yeah, some grade A review. Awesome. Okay, good. Now we have actually finished the boating class. Like that's 100% done.
Anything else in voting class?
Nope. See, that's just it wants it initialized and then it wants boating test.all. That's all we need. Awesome. Good. So I've seen some people have it in their workflow where when they've done it, they delete it from the README just to not distract them. I've seen other people not do that. You can do whatever you want. But I would tell you, if something's distracting to you, just get rid of it, right? Don't let things that are distracting your workflow stay around, right? Part of being a software engineer is being that Vulcan, right? Get rid of things that don't make sense, right? Just do things that make you faster, ignore things that make you slower, right? I've also seen people, one student I had before had a nice habit where when he started a class, he would copy and paste everything over, comment it out, and then work in the README, kind of. So I can show you that later. But that was a good thing. So be creative, do whatever you want to do, you know, it's all good. Good. So let's return over here to this student class. What are we missing? We're missing the instance methods. Boom. Do you guys want to just start at the beginning? Start with this add voting test, or do you want to? We can take requests. Anybody want to?
Wait.
Go back to where?
Where'd you do some voting tests? Where was that? Where did they go?
Oh. The instructions. Yeah, I just deleted the instructions.
Did you have the readers and scissors?
You don't need them. Oh wait, I do need them. Oh, you're right. I'm gonna need them later. Oh my gosh, why is it over here
I
now?
know what those are. We just need to know that they're set.
Okay. let's hold off and implement them if we need them in the future. Well, we won't spoil the surprise of whether we need to do that. Okay, so any objections to working on add voting test?
Can we add oh wait, never mind.
Okay, cool. Fun question there. Okay, so.
Console instead of like we've been doing things in.
Oh, you wanna keep being productive and cool. I like that. Okay. So what are we doing? We're adding a voting test between the two of them?
Well, yeah, but we haven't defined that method yet, so what's the point?
Oh yeah.
Why it's not my
This is
console.
all over the map. Gosh. Okay. So we'll implement this and then we'll add it to our console, right?
Right.
Okay. Good. If you wanted to test just the constructor in your console, you could do that too. It just depends on like what your test is. I'm inclined to do the voting thing, and that way we're just testing the methods and not the objects. To me, it makes sense to test functionality first. Different people test in different ways, right? Remember, just follow the advice that makes you work faster and ignore the advice that makes you not, right? Gosh, why is Adam opening so many files all over the place? Okay. So, how are we going to implement this add voting test? No, whatever you guys start talking, and I'll do something.
Voting test on new.
Voting test.new. Oh.
Wait, but we need to have that word, argument.
Yeah, the arguments. We're going to need the arguments.
At the very least, the name of the voting test.
It won't.
At the very least. Does it tell us? Oh, it tells us. It should take in. Oh, it's got to give the thing. Okay, so.
That's just.
Okay, and then I see. Okay, so we're gonna need. What are we gonna need? We're gonna need test name, right? Okay, and then we're gonna need. Are we taking it as status or is it just pending?
Status.
Okay, status. Okay.
Well, let's default it.
Oh, default it to pending.
Or wait, no,
So
what
then
if
we
we
don't need it.
It's already defaulted, it's already. Wait, but.
We're still gonna just put status.
Okay, we're gonna leave it as is for now, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then we want an instructor, right? Good. So here's the thing, right? If we want to add a failed test right away, right? We have to pass that into the constructor. If we want to add a pending test, we don't have to pass it. But how do it's easier in the long run to just go ahead and pass it in, right? Oh my gosh, guys, because you can pass in a hash, you can do whatever you want, right? It's the topsy-turvy world of Ruby function calls. So what I'm saying is like, so imagine this is going to default to pending, right? Imagine it's defaulting to pending. So we want to not pass it in, right? We just don't pass anything in and that'll work. But then if we do want to override that in the future, we then have to add in some like conditional logic to say like, if status was passed in, then give it to this constructor. And it ends up being more complicated than it's worth.
We're defaulting to pending twice.
Where does it?
Right, but it's still ultimately easier, right? Because this becomes the wrapper just to call this new. So you can implement it both ways, right? We can. The question is, I'm answering this question horribly and I'm rambling, so I'm just going to start over. Whew. Okay. Imagine we don't include this, right? Then we have to create new tests that are pending. We don't have the option to create past tests or failed tests, right? So if we...
Oh, okay, so I feel like the cleaner way to do it would be to have the default to pending in the add voting test, and then when the instructor can create a test as well, have that default there, and then just remove the default from voting test to RV, because every time it's already going to have a default value.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying. No, that makes a lot of sense. That is probably the best way to do it, actually. But it's not worth deleting the code that we've already written. But yeah, it would work exactly the same way. So the idea is...
Couldn't you just put status?
Yeah, that's what we're going to end up doing. I'll clarify. Okay, so what do we want? We want the student is going to be self, right? Oh gosh, how do we find the student? We didn't take student. Okay, the student is going to be self. The instructor is going to be instructor, and the status is going to be pending. It's going to be status. Okay, so here's what she's saying. She's saying no matter what, if we want to create a new test, we're not going to create a new test directly, right? We have the ability to create this initialize thing, but we're promising ourselves as the developer of the app that we're not going to do that. We're not going to ever do voting test.new. Instead, if we want to create a new voting test, we're going to do it through the add voting test method or through the pass student, fail student method, right? And so because of that, we don't actually need this default here, right? We can have the defaults in the functions that we're actually going to call, and it'll have the same effect.
Would another option be you could set status to nil on the add voting test? So you always will have a value for it's being supplied in the main parameters for voting test, and then you can still use voting test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly how Ruby would behave in that context. I don't know if it would say you are passing a nil, you must deliberately mean nil, and nil would override the default, or not. That's it. Yeah, we'd have to experiment with that. That's going to be pretty interesting. JavaScript, just to talk about the future here, does have two data types that provide that functionality. It's got a null that's the same as nil, and also an undefined. So if you want to take the default, you pass undefined, and if you pass a null, it says you must mean null, and that overrides everything. So it's an interesting question. I just don't know what Ruby would do. Cool. Awesome. So there we go. Now, boom. Yeah?
So, sorry, it would be okay if we just had test name, status, whatever the other ones are, instructor, and we no pending?
Yeah.
Never have to write pending ever?
Oh, yeah. This is us stretching more than we need to. That's perfectly fine. Okay. So what are we going to do now? We just move on, right?
Just test it.
Okay. How can we test this? Yeah, we'll just go ahead and do it. And Patrick's going to add a voting test. What is it? Test name? I called it test 1. And instructor is going to be Puff.
Do you know what the theme is going to be for the coding challenge?
Of course, I know. Oh my gosh, what is happening?
Keyword name, you're missing
Or
an
did you
element.
call it?
Did I call it name and not test name?
You call test name, status, instructor.
Test name, instructor.
Self.
Wait a minute, go back to.
You still need the
Go back to
self.
student?
No, self is Patrick. Yeah, but actually you need to
Yeah,
put
you
Patrick.
still need
yeah.
student self.
You need
You didn't put test name in the voting test.new.
You don't need students.
Yeah, I did. Didn't I?
No.
Oh, in here,
Yeah,
okay.
you need it.
Named, test name. There we go. Okay, that's what I called it, right? I called it name. Good, awesome. Whew. Gosh, I thought for a second I really actually didn't know. Okay, and now to test this out, we're just gonna do voting test.all. Look at that. Everything is exactly where we want it to be, and we're ready to move on. For real this time, not as a trick question.
Can you go back to the test that you
Yeah.
wrote?
The console?
Yeah, good.
Sure.
So the voting test requires, go back to voting test real quick, see what it requires, a new one. It requires the student, the name, the status, and the instructor.
Yeah, 4 things.
All right, now go to the test.
And you don't.
So why is that happening? That's happening because this voting test method, gosh, get out of here. Okay. It provides student on its own, right?
Yeah,
So we don't need to pass in student, and then status is defaults. Okay.
I don't like the status default being there.
It's too fancy. Too fancy. Let's go ahead and say that Patrick, he's got one test he's in the middle of. He's also got a test that he's failed. And he's got a test that he's passed. Okay?
Except in the episode where Patrick went to SpongeBob's school, wasn't he like a really good student?
Oh, yeah,
Gosh.
really good, yeah.
It's a question only nerds would know the answer to. Look at that. See?
Very nice.
Very nice. Okay.
So you need to put in self.
So you
have
Yeah, so you don't have to, because it's calling it all
Good. Boom. So,
So how you like to test is basically putting all your test data
Yeah, that's how I do it for this kind of a thing. If it were a larger scale application, I would use RSpec tests. There's not a lot of value to writing RSpec tests in the context of a code challenge. RSpec is there for managing tests across multiple teammates for projects that are going to have like complicated features, right? The big advantage of RSpec is it lets you know that if something in file A breaks something in file B, you see that right away. That's why you want robots testing your code. And the code challenge just doesn't involve that. Yeah. So it's not, I don't think the payoff is worth it. It's definitely a good thing to know, but it's not like a mod 1 thing to know. It's like a ongoing, and then definitely in mod 5, you'll feel like you should have learned it a couple mods ago. And, but it's not something to distract yourself with today, is what I mean. Whew, gosh, we're all done, right?
Yeah.
No. That's it. The end.
Just say these things to make sure that we're awake.
That's enough for me.
Enough review. Satiated. Okay, so the last student method, we'll just dive on in. I'm not even going to ask you if there are any objections. Oh my gosh, what?
Okay, never mind.
Okay.
I would like to do pass student, fail student before moving on to the next.
Oh, okay. Well, if you actually have a preference, then we'll do this. I was just being salty because I thought no one would have a preference. Good. So you want to do pass student, fail student. Which do you want to do first?
Fail.
Okay. Fail students. What is fail student going to take in?
Fail what?
Fail struggles. There we go. Okay. How's this going to work?
Dude, will you scroll down?
I can't scroll down. Gosh. On the. Okay. We're doing fail student, right?
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to take in test name and student name. Wait, is it going to take in a student name or a student object? A student name. Wait.
Or no student name.
Okay.
Yeah.
So clearly this method should take in a student object and not a student name, but we'll stick with what the directions say. We'll just silently kind of be smug about it. Okay. Shum. Now, I'm going to say, I'm going to point something out here about the directions. And I'm going to say that this instruction here says it should be just like past students. Which to me makes it seem like there might be a third method under the hood that would keep things dry, right? If we're going to have two functions and our README is telling us that they're going to behave basically the same way, it might...
She's a grade student?
She's a great student.
Oh, snap. Okay. I did that too. Grade students.
So that was my question, because it's asking for a pass student method and it's asking for a fail student method.
Yeah, you are allowed to write additional helper methods. You are not limited to the README.
But if we just do grade student and then pass in passed or pass in failed, is it technically not?
You do have to eventually implement. So those methods in the README do have to be there. It's not good enough to say that, but it's always a good practice to extract the shared functionality, right? So we're going to have a grade student. What's it going to take in? It's going to take in the test name, the student name, and let's call it status because we called it status everywhere else, right? And then fail student, super easy to implement, right? Okay. Was there some other complaint? Okay. And then we're gonna just, I'm not even gonna ask for your input. I'm just gonna be like test name, student name, status, failed. Bam, whole method done. And that's simple enough. We might not even have to test it, but we will anyway. And then pass student is going to be exactly the same, except, good. So now all the interesting stuff is happening inside of grade student, right?
Yeah.
Are you guys good? I'm sensing some panic in the crowd.
We're wondering why it's so.
Oh, why did I put self and not?
Because it's just an intolerance.
So okay.
Oh, that's a
Yeah,
written
it's on
in
the-
Right.
You can skip, right?
Hold on, I'm confused. You're talking about in line 14, right? I can do either, it's both correct, either self or great student. Both are fine. So this is mostly a stylistic choice. This is the same question as asking, why does Paul want you to call the setter self.var equals instead of just var equals, right? For exactly the same reason. It's good for readability because it makes it obvious that it's an instance method. It also makes it so that it's not going to be confused with a local variable, right? So if I had something like this, what's going to happen, right?
No method error.
Right. Or maybe it will work. Maybe Ruby will figure out, well, this is a method call and there is a method, right? It might, but who knows, right? It's confusing and it requires knowing subtleties about how Ruby is going to do things. So even if this were to work, it would still be potentially bad practice. So that's kind of the real reason. Probably the biggest reason why I do it is because I come from a background in languages where you have to do this dot. So that's my habit. Whew. But it's not like wrong if you don't do it, right? We're not going to scoff at your code challenge. Okay, so tell me about grade student. What does grade student got to do?
So find the test.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, it has to make one.
So it does not match the word argument.
Find the test.
Right, so it's going to try to find a test. Then if it's not found, it's going to make a new one. And then if it is,
Specify that it has to find the test with the same test name and student name.
yes. Good. Cool. So step one, how do we find the test?
Do.
Test name.
First name.
Good. So just to review, find takes in a block. That block needs to return true or false. And find is going to return the first element in an array where that block returns true. So technically the documentation that I was reading earlier this morning, it says it'll return the first one where the return value is not false, which makes me think if you were to return like a string or something from it, it would still return that. But either way, best practice, return true or false. So right now we're just finding a test, maybe, and then throwing it out into the ether. Is that what we want?
No.
Let's just go ahead and put that in a local variable. Awesome. So I have a test, maybe. Let's do I need to, let's come back to that idea of do we need the readers, right? So now we have a better idea of what we actually need to read, right? We need to read student, and we need to read name, right? So notice that's something I could have implemented right away. I could have just made readers for everything, but by waiting until I actually knew that I needed it, one, I make sure that there's not pointless code, and I also make sure that people aren't given access to parts of my object where they don't need access.
You
Right?
need to read the status as well.
And write the status.
Yeah, you're right. That doesn't make any sense. Status. Good. Anyway, meanwhile, back in grade student. Okay, so if not make one, how do I tell if my test was found?
It won't be
Test equals nil.
If test.
If test equals nil, if test.nil. Oh,
Oh, yeah, that's it.
yeah. Lots of ways to do it. I like test.nil. It's very Ruby-esque. And it just reminds me that I'm writing in Ruby, you know. I don't know any other language that wants you to put question marks in method names. It's so weird to me. It's like I would never use punctuation in a method, but Ruby likes it, so we'll use it here. Good. So if test.nil, what do we do?
Voting, wait.
We just
Oh,
run.
sorry. Don't we need to go to the student class and create it from there?
Oh, so we'd want to do.
Yeah, we have an ad, we have something, can we look at the student part? Don't we have something in student?
Yeah, we do add voting test.
Yeah.
So right now we have the student name, right? So we need to get the actual student themselves, right? Should we have done that at the beginning of our method?
Yep.
Yeah.
How are we going to get the student?
There's a find student
Passion
function.
in the student.
Oh my gosh, did we skip the find student method? Oh my
Sorry,
gosh.
that's my fault.
It is your fault. So we're just going to do find student, student name. Good. Awesome. So now let's go ahead and implement that. Def self.find student. And that's going to go ahead and take in a student name. Oh my gosh. Let's get rid of that white space. How am I doing this?
Student
Student equals self at all the time.
Yeah, you can do that test better, right? The whole
Yeah.
Yeah.
Student.
Student that name equals, just saying,
Looking good?
yeah.
Awesome. Whew. Good. Awesome. So that function will return a student 100% of the time, right?
You check it?
No, it won't.
It won't. Oh my gosh. When will it not?
If there's
There's no student.
no name.
So you're telling me if I do Patrick, that's fine, but if I do then it gives me nil. Awesome. So whenever I have a function that can return nil, I get really uneasy. And I make sure that if I ever call that function, I always immediately check for nil and decide how I'm going to handle it, because I do not like dealing with null class errors. I think that's it's a bummer. So what are we going to do if there is no student found?
Put no student found. No student
Raise
found.
an error.
Yeah.
Student does not have a name.
Okay, we could raise an error. Let's do it that way since it's super fancy. Just remember that you don't have to do this on the code challenge. Argument error.
Wait, is this going to stop everything else?
Yeah, it does. Is that what you want?
No.
Oh my gosh, what do you want?
Rescue.
What do you want?
We could just return. We could just return nil.
So that's stopping?
It stops the method.
Wouldn't it
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
So
Yeah.
we can use that.
Oh my gosh, guys, make up your mind. What do you want? Do you want an Excel?
Yeah, we can stop. We can stop.
We'll leave it. We'll leave it for now. We'll leave it for now.
I have a question about find student.
Yes.
For find student, I did self.all.find instead of what?
Oh, instead of student.find, student.all.find, 100% fine.
Okay.
Perfectly correct. Again, that's a stylistic choice. I like using student dot for all class methods just because it reminds me. That self refers to the class there. Good. Okay. So we've got a student. We've got a test.
I like student better. Yes.
How do we create a student now? Okay. We do student dot add voting test, right?
Yeah. Testing. And instruct the self dot name. Or no, just self. And
Yeah,
that's it.
Status.
We don't have-
Status,
that-
status, because we put in the status.
Is that all I need? Is that all
We'll
we?
give it as that.
And
Are
the-
we?
And, and test name. Wait,
Yeah, I got test name already.
You should output.
At the
Wait,
first
just do it.
iteration,
Mhm.
are you still checking
Oh, yeah, still check.
against like student name? Should you be checking against student?
That's a better way to do it.
What?
Yeah, under all the.
Oh my gosh, you're right. That's awesome. Look at how slick we are. Cool. Okay. Are we comfortable? Comfortable with creating a new test? Okay. What about updating an existing test?
I'm sorry, can you explain why did you get rid of like one shoe?
Oh, okay. So before we were comparing student.firstname to student name, right? Why were we doing that? We were doing that because we didn't have the student object, okay?
Yeah.
So now we just rewrote the beginning of our function so that we do have the student object, which means now there's no reason, right? Okay. Awesome. So how do we update a test?
It's test, not status.
Let's do this with an else clause. Just test.status equals status.
Yeah.
Cool.
But
Yes.
yes, that would work, yes.
How can we possibly know if it'll work?
We'll never know.
Okay, so let's load in there. Notice we already have some tests, right? Voting test.all. We've got these 3 tests that Patrick has taken. Test 1, did he pass or fail?
Pass.
Pass student test name, right? We take in test name, and our test name is test 1. Then we take in student name, and our student name is Patrick. Whew, it goes ahead and returns that. Let's see. Whoa, look at that. Test 1 changed. It changed to pass. It was not added in. What other edge cases should we test here?
We should test
One that
for
doesn't-
test names that we don't actually already have.
Oh, so let's do test 10. Okay, look at that. It was created.
So in the README, it says that the test student should return the voting test instance. Is that what we're returning here?
So that's a good thing. I was going to bring it up myself. Notice we did the second time, but we did not the first time. The first time we returned status. So we'll look into why that is. The last edge case that we thought about was what do we do if the student's not found, and that returns nil, just like we wanted. It doesn't crash, nothing goes wrong. So when we created a new test, we returned it. Otherwise, what did we do?
We just updated the status.
And then we just returned the status. So let's go ahead and right at the end, just throw a test in there so that it returns test.
Well, that will return nil though, because you're not setting the student to add voting test.
Oh, good point. Does student return, add student returns the voting test?
Yeah.
I just would put in the else,
Yeah.
just put return test or just test. Yeah, just return.
Just a one of those?
Yes.
That would work.
I don't know. Let's find out. So that returns nil because there's no student. That returns a test because it's a new test. And that returns a test even though it's an old test. You guys seem like you're on the right track here. It seems like it's all working out. Cool. Okay, let's do a checklist here. Instructor has a name. Yes. It's got all, right? We can pass a student. Can we fail a student? Yeah. Good. So let's just go ahead and delete that. Okay. Update the console. Okay. So how should we update the console?
And the test that we just did. Puff.pass student Patrick. Yeah.
Okay. Is that good enough? Or
Fail student as well.
and we'll just do our brand new test.
Fail it.
Awesome. So now we should have no pendings, right, when we do this.
When it comes to the code challenge, if we don't have it as clean and dry as it should be, is that
Totally fine. Yeah, we treat it, we look at it from the perspective of a timed test, right? It is not, we're going to give you advice, but the primary focus for us as graders is how can we have our one-on-one conversation in a way that's going to most benefit you, right? It's one of the only times that we in the program get to really just sit down and talk to you guys one-on-one. So really that's our focus. We spend much more time during the grading talking about what advice we think you would most benefit from than we do talking about like pass fail. We really don't think about it. It's not like a grade. It's like, is this good enough? Yes. Now what conversation does each of you need to have, right? What skills should you work on, right? Because everything can always be better. So we're always looking for how you can get better.
Will that evaluation happen on the same day?
Yes, that is the goal. Our policy is it happens on the same day. You guys are the largest class we've ever had, so just keep that in mind. Since I've been here, there's only been once when we haven't had time to talk to every person on the same day. Generally, we're pretty quick about it. So it does mean that we're going to be off the floor for a while. So you'll get out of the code challenge, go to a bunch of labs, and have nobody to ask questions to because we're all doing that.
Like 3 instructors at once talk to you, or like?
No. It's one-on-one. We'll split you guys up. Yeah. It's not intense, and it's very conversational. The point is to be like a professional environment code review, right? Even so, I've heard real life developers, you get these regular conversations where you push in a commit, and your manager will sit down with you and talk to you about what that commit was like and just tell you what pointers he thinks you need to know, right? It's just, the development world is very much about getting access to more experienced programmers and to get as much benefit and learning out of your colleagues as possible. And we're just kind of simulating that experience here. So we try to make it feel more like that than like a teacher-y kind of yelling at you sort of thing. It's not like when I was teaching in the real schools and I would just scream for no reason and, scare everyone out of their mind. Cool. Awesome. What's left? Grade percentage. Is that the last thing?
Yep.
First name? I think it is.
Yes.
It is now. Okay. Yeah, just delete everything, submit an empty repo, and we will sit down and have a conversation about it.
Have voting tests that returns all the voting tests?
It does not. Was that in the README?
It is.
Oh no. Okay, let's go ahead and do that then. Def voting tests? Like that, you're saying?
Oh, no, it's in tests.
Wait, where is this?
It's supposed to return all of the voting tests that have that student as a student for those voting tests.
And that'll actually be useful for the grade.
Where was that? I didn't see
Was
that.
it not in the README?
It was not, but it's useful for implementing. I was going to encourage that we do this method anyway. I would have called it tests and not voting
Okay, I
tests.
might
but
have created it to be a helper method for something else. I just don't remember where I used it.
I think it's going to be good.
I think
Did I use
Yeah,
useful.
good decision. Either way, what am I typing here?
What do you have?
Well, you're looking through all the voting tests and voting them all. And you can map
Map.
Oh,
Select.
select.
or select.
Oh gosh, you were just out of your mind for a second
You're
there.
looking for students? So
Yeah.
2 students.
So, yeah, so you're like,
Oh, you're looking for tests.
Right.
yeah.
And how do I know if I've found a test?
Student name equals self.
Student name or just?
I can't remember what the.
Yeah, we'll just do student because it's the whole student object, right? Right? Did we do that?
I
or-
didn't remember what it was
Yeah.
called.
Okay.
Floating test.
Awesome. So now, if we go ahead and exit here, and we ask Patrick,
Yeah.
and we ask Patrick for his voting tests. Look, we get a list of all of them. So this percentage, right? They tell me that to calculate this percentage, we're going to need to divide the number of tests passed by the number of tests total, right? Is there any other helper method that might be good?
Getting the amount of tests passed.
Yeah, you could assign 2 variables or they could be arrays and you could do failed test and pass test.
Would you do that? Okay, so here's my question. Do we want a helper method, any other helper method before we dive into grade percentage?
We want to do the past tests, right?
That's what I'm going to encourage you to do.
Yeah.
It just cares about the passing.
You can
Yeah.
also make voting tests accept an optional argument that filters by status, so that you can reuse the same logic.
Oh, snap, and then you're only looping once.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, so we're going to do this the simple way, and then if there's time, we'll do it the other way. Okay, here's how I did it, right? I had these two methods. I got all the voting tests, and then I was all like self.votingtests.select, do test, and then I was just test.status equals passed. Okay, and then if we do that, then we can ask Patrick for all of his voting tests, but we can also ask Patrick for his past tests. What? I need what?
It's voting tests instead of tests.
Past. Did you mean voting tests? Past test?
You put voting test without an S.
I did, but wait a minute. How is this different from
It's
here?
in the actual method.
It's in past test.
Past test. Oh gosh. What a wild train ride. What an emotional day. Okay. Past test. Look at that. It's just the past test. You know what we should do? We should have the past test, and then we should have the past tests, right? And then it'll all work out. Yeah. Okay. So that's how I did it. The interesting thing is, well, we'll talk about it later. Okay.
There's also a way to make this pub a better teacher.
Oh.
Or if you
Was that a?
No,
Let's see what
because
you
the way.
Ever since you said your fault, you've been waiting to get it.
Okay, no. So the way to make her a better teacher, the way it's set up right now, she would count the pending tests against his GPA, but that's some shitty teacher type shit.
Yeah.
Oh.
So only counting the
snap.
failed tests against the GPA.
That
the
is.
pending tests are
So
like,
you
okay,
want-
you haven't done it yet, that's fine. I haven't graded it yet. It's my fault, not yours.
So you could do completed tests. Yeah, graded tests.
Yeah, that's smart.
So how would you just?
You
See,
guys
I mean,
No, that's very good. That's
all the
very
testing
good.
is not pending.
Oh, interesting. But more interesting than that, I'm bored with arrays now. I wanna do numbers. I wanna get the number of graded tests. Screen out the answer. Awesome. Now we're all done.
No.
What?
Too slow.
To float or 2F?
Divided by self.
Wait a minute. You guys are mixing up your denominators and your numerators.
Oh, right.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Self dot pass test
Wait, no, not the.
to the length. To it.
Whew.
And then put that in parentheses, and then multiply by 100, so that it gives back a percentage.
Oh gosh. When I did this earlier today, I forgot that percentages were multiplied by 100. I just didn't do that. Yeah. What even is a percentage, man? You know? That's crazy. It's a Latin word. I taught Latin for years. Okay.
We could do round two.
So, let's go ahead and ask Patrick for his grade percentage. Boom. 50%. But will that change over time? If Puff then, I don't know, passes him again. Test name final test. Student name Patrick. Look at that, it changed. And that's good enough for me to think that the whole logic's working. Wait a minute, is that, oh yeah, 60%. Okay, all good. So what Ben was saying, here's something where looping is really expensive when you're talking about a computer program, right? Computers are super duper fast, and there's only a handful of things that they do slowly. And one of those things is looping, right? The fact that looping takes a long time is the reason that like searching for things and sorting things are such big deals, right? When you guys start interviewing, you're almost always going to get asked a question about how you sort something or how you search for something. And the reason for that is because that's, right, if you got to get those well, that's what most of your computational time is going to be. So what he's pointing out is that right now we're searching two different times, right? We're getting voting tests, all of them, searching through all of them, then returning them, and then searching through all of them again, and we're just doing that too many times. So what if what if we could get all of it in one go,
So
right?
He wants to just know what all of his tests were, so he can see which ones he wants to retake.
Well, that's right. So that's where this logic would get a little complicated, right? We would have to do something like status and then default it to nil. And then we would have to say something like if,
It's tricky because.
right, we'd have to do if test.self, test.student is not equal to self, right? This isn't even my test, so that's definitely returning false, right? Oh my gosh, how do I even type, man? So, okay. So if we make it past that if statement, we know that the student matches, right? So now, if status does not equal nil, right? So if status does equal nil, then we're done. And we would just return true, okay? But if status does equal nil, then we want to return test.status equals status, right? And then we can kind of filter through everything in one go. And that way, if we think about how many times are we looping through every student here, right? I call past tests. Past tests call voting tests. Voting test loops through everything, right? So that's one loop through all tests. Then past test loops through all of those. That's two loops through all tests. Then graded tests calls voted tests, loops through all of them again, and then graded test loops through them all again, right? So that's 4 loops. This way, we're doing one loop and killing 2 birds with 1 stone. So if we do it this way, then we would do something like past test would equal voting tests status passed. Right, and that just cuts the number of loops in half, right? Because now I'm doing one loop to get the number of past tests, and then another to give the number of graded tests.
So as it currently stands, do we have a message that will just display all their tests?
Yes, and that's what voting tests does,
If it's nil, then.
Q.
right? So Patrick dot voting tests. Yeah, I wanted to do it with the old version. Yeah, so this just displays them all. Okay. So if that last bit didn't make sense, that's fine.
Can you go back to the code?
Yes, we
So
can.
so with voting tests, you're basically saying if the student name is not self,
Yeah,
then you wouldn't even look at it.
yeah, don't look at it at all. Ignore that.
But if it is,
Then look at the
that's when you run
status. Yeah,
test.status.
yeah.
Right, this would be like the, what I read about the what is it called, order,
Big O.
the big O notation, like
Yeah.
just makes it from a, like n, 2n or n squared or something. It could n squared because it's a loop within a loop.
It's sequential loops, so I think it would be at 4n, but it takes it down to 2n. But I don't know. So all of that is something we're going to talk a lot about in mods 4 and 5 when we talk more about interviewing. So it's kind of
Okay, sorry.
so it's a good thing right now to know that it's going to be a question and to kind of start thinking how many times am I looping. But it's not important that you're answering that question right now. But it's always good to know what questions you're going to ask, right? So it's a good thing to talk about.
But what is the next question?
Okay.
I'll be doing video later,
Yeah, you're
Oh, I should, yeah.
Oh, that's your blog on.
I have no idea about it. So.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I could do it, yeah.
If you
It's
really
good.
wanted to have more fun with it, we could have it where if a student fails a test 10 times, then Mrs. Puff sends herself to prison, like that one episode.
You could do that.
Keep the student from the record.
The student from the record. That's more realistic. Can you imagine if the student went to prison? That would be better.
Prison. I didn't watch the show. I'm sorry.
Okay, so remember real quick that we have viewers at home watching on YouTube who are sick today or absent or blew this off. So is there anything you guys want to ask before we stop talking to our YouTube fans? No. Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. If you loved the review, check out our Patreon. There we go.